First, though, at 8 it's the illness that feels like a living death for those with the most severe symptoms. And yet a Cumbrian NHS trust is facing criticism for expecting patients with ME, or chronic fatigue syndrome, to come to 2.5-hour group appointments. The North Cumbria NHS Trust says it tailors services to meet people's needs. Our political reporter is Bob Cooper. Morning again, Bob. Just explain first off, ME, what exactly is this condition?
Hi, Mike. Well, ME stands for myalgic encephalomyelitis. It's also known as chronic fatigue syndrome, or CFS. It's an illness with many symptoms, including a fatigue that can leave people so weak they're barely able to move, but a whole range of other things, including sickness, headaches, viral symptoms like a sore throat, and many others. It's estimated it affects about 250,000 people in England and Wales, more than 2/3 of those women. The root cause is not known, but it's often linked to a triggering event, in many cases an infection. I've been speaking to Denise Mijatovic from near Cockermouth. Her symptoms are so severe she couldn't record an interview. She struggled even, Mike, to write a description of her symptoms in an email because of another symptom, a cognitive difficulty called brain fog. So she simply sent me this, which has been voiced by one of our producers.
On a worse day, which is most of my days, I'm a living death. Having ME is a living death. You're barely alive, but in no way able to live.
So that gives you a sense of just how bad it can be. There's no cure for it, but some people do get better. I've been to Gamblesby in the Eden Valley to talk to two people who are now better than they once were.
I'm Jane Hurd. I was diagnosed with ME round about the late 1980s. I'd never been well. I was ill when I was 7 with measles, and then I had another when I was 15 with glandular fever. Never really recovered very well from that. And then late 80s, I got a laryngitis type infection, and from that it just floored me. I had 6 months in bed that year, and from that I then started using a wheelchair, and I used a wheelchair for about 18 years.
Hi, I'm Jan Blackshaw. 2010, I was very active and very busy, and it was the Christmas. I had literally just put out the Christmas dinner, and I went and sat down in the front room, and from then on I just couldn't move. I couldn't talk, I couldn't move. I was almost paralysed. Because ME hasn't got a definitive test to say this is what you've got. I had to go through all the tests of what it could have been before they decided, well, you've not got any of those, so it must be ME. From then on, I was referred to the specialist CFS clinic where I lived, which was in Derbyshire. I can't thank them enough because they were absolutely brilliant. They understood totally where I was coming from, and they didn't push me any more than I could cope with. We moved up to Cumbria with my husband's work in 2013, by which time I was a little bit better. I could walk, I could do small jobs, and I was referred there to the CFS clinic in Keswick. Unfortunately, they stood by the NICE guidelines and insisted that I had the treatments that were recommended, and so I had to do a certain amount of exercise. I had to do a certain amount of cognitive work like reading, etc., and it completely wiped me out. I was a mess, and so it took me many years of doing my own thing and knowing how much I could cope with to get to the point I am now, where I'm fairly normal majority of the time.
Jan Blackshaw and earlier Jane Hurd from Gamblesby, speaking to our reporter Bob Cooper. Bob's still with us this morning. Bob, Jan mentioned NICE guidance there. Just explain that for us.
Yeah, well, NICE is the National Institute for Care Excellence, which issues guidelines for health providers. Back then it endorsed something called graded exercise therapy, which Jan described there. It's very controversial, and the guidelines have recently been updated so that it's not recommended. The new guidelines also say that the length and frequency of appointments should be adapted to meet people's needs. And yet the webpage for the Chronic Fatigue Syndrome Service in South Cumbria describes a group programme with 8 sessions over 3 months lasting 2.5 hours each, and people are expected to attend all of them. Both Jan and Jane agree that would be very difficult for many people with ME. The webpage doesn't describe any other options.
The North Cumbria NHS Trust runs this service, Bob. What's it had to say about this?
Well, they say no one was available for interview, but in a statement they said that the service is focused on delivering evidence-based care, which includes NICE guidance. The first contact for everyone is an assessment to ensure we can tailor the service to the individual's needs. With the patient, we determine what will be the best approach for them. The Trust runs services in both the north and the south of the county for people with ME and other persistent conditions. They say they get around 2,000 new referrals a year and offer face-to-face, online and telephone appointments as well as group sessions.
Thank you, Bob. Bob Cooper is BBC Radio Cumbria's political reporter. Well, I'm joined now by Sonya Chowdhury, Chief Executive of the charity Action for ME. Sonya, good morning to you. You've heard what the Trust says about its services. What are your thoughts as to what you've heard?
Good morning. I'm concerned to hear that the information on the website hasn't yet been changed. The revision to the NICE guideline states that no one-size therapy fits all, and therefore people should be worked with on an individual basis and have tailored plans. Now, if the Trust is applying that, then an 8-week programme where people are required to attend all sessions doesn't quite fit with that. I do hear that they meet with people individually to assess what's appropriate and that they work to the NICE guidelines. So I hope that the information that's provided to people is amended to include the change with the NICE guideline, because it appears that that's not yet happened.
Just explain from your point of view, this group programme of 2.5-hour sessions for people with ME, why isn't that appropriate for anyone with significant symptoms?
There was a key change within the new NICE guideline, which recognised that any therapy based on physical activity or exercise as a cure for ME should not be used. It said that they should be tailored and that they should be specific and that there shouldn't be fixed incremental increases. And that is something that was applied in the previous guideline. It was called graded exercise therapy, or GET. And that was seen to be a curative approach for people with ME, and indeed what we hear regularly is that it made people worse. So what we hope is that services will continue to offer individualised plans that recognises the severity of their illness and does not force them into programmes that require full completion in the way that is described on the Trust website at the moment, because actually that can make people worse.
Because it is worth pointing out here, and I'm guessing, Sonya, that you appreciate and understand that people with ME, they have vastly different symptoms, and the complexities in diagnosing someone and then getting the help that will work for them, it must be very, very difficult for the medical teams.
I think it's incredibly difficult, and there are some fantastic clinicians and practitioners that work with people with ME currently, as we heard Jan say in her interview. But what we're most concerned about is where people are not following the revised guideline, where people are still being forced into activity and that their programmes are not tailored. And the guideline came out a few weeks ago. We appreciate that people need time to amend their approaches and revise the information that they have. But it's really critical that people have that tailored approach, and that ME is recognised as a complex chronic medical condition that has a significant effect on the quality of their lives.
You had a meeting with the Health Secretary Sajid Javid last week to try and make some progress on this issue. Did you make progress? How did it go?
Well, this is the first time that we've had a public declaration by somebody in that position stating that more must be done and a commitment to doing more. It was an opportunity to talk about the current research, what the gaps are with research, and to share our thoughts on the next steps. We were also able to talk about and highlight the Decode ME study, which is the world's largest DNA study, which we will be working to launch early next year, and a priority setting partnership where we're working with people with ME, carers and clinicians to identify the top 10 research priorities. And we want to work with the government and the government department to ensure that those priorities are funded, because we're living with a situation where a lack of funding for research has translated into a significant lack of care and a lack of evidence base, which makes it difficult for clinicians and significantly so for people living with the disease.
All right, Sonya, thank you for coming on the show this morning. That's Sonya Chowdhury, who is the Chief Executive of the charity Action for ME.